I am, as of June of last year, the Chief Information Security Officer for Wellforce, which is a large medical system, health system on the East Coast, centered in Boston. It's a collaborative partnership of three separate hospital systems coming together with the purposes of serving, the Boston community and surrounding areas. We're, affiliated with Tufts University, which is a large college in the Eastern Massachusetts area. Actually, my best friend is CISO of another large health system in the U.S., and he had spent some time working with Cylance as part of his onboarding of new technologies and new protection strategies. And he made an introduction to me to your product, and the work that he had done really showed a lot of value. So we took a closer look following our chat with him. I came in and was new to the organization and just had the ability to take a fresh look at what we were doing and think about it in the context of 2017 and what's happening in the industry and where the threats are coming from, and sort of trying to overlay that with how do we defend ourselves from those things, and finding the best things that help us do that. So it's not to say that we focused particularly on endpoints. We focused on the entire security strategy and really looking for areas where we thought we could improve. I'd say the second thing, in sort of in the spirit of Wellforce, is to try to find opportunities to consolidate and simplify our operation, looking at it as an opportunity to say, hey, how can I make my job easier? How can I make my organization more protected? We looked at opportunities to standardize and then operationalize on things that achieve those goals. We had a variety of strategies on how to deal with endpoint security issues, and they were all very specific, and to a certain degree at one point they made sense. But the threats have changed. It's every year I feel like we're talking about something new, and so what a protection strategy that might have been effective in 2015 or 2014 when that product was selected isn't necessarily the best answer for, say, the stuff you're seeing now. I would say for us, and this has been confirmed in, I'm a big fan of the Verizon DBIR. I read that. I think that data set is awesome, and I sort of look into that as much as I can. And, it's one source. Obviously, talking to others is one, but, leveraging that data is really interesting to, say what is happening in healthcare? Where is it happening? And if you talk to the data scientists behind the report, which I've had the opportunity to, they can get really specific with that. But reading into that, and it doesn't take a genius to say, well, look, these are the top 10 things that are happening, endpoints on top of that list, and if you really connect the dots within a medical center, there are many classes of endpoints. Some are used as, word processing productivity, and some are actually hooked up to patients, right? And sort of looking at it from all angles and saying, well, okay, the threats to those are X, the impacts could be very dramatic depending on who you hit. We really need to focus on this as being a big issue. The POC was super straightforward for us. And we had done some work, obviously, given the fact that we have, I don't know, 6 to 7 to some degree, depending on the flavor, endpoints within the system already to sort of judge from. So that was an important part to have in place prior to doing a successful POC, was actually having something to compare it to. So we did a little research trying to figure out what we had and where it was and how it was performing. We then launched into the POC, I want to say in like late October timeframe. Really simple process, which was sort of the first wow moment when we got going was, the amount of time that was spent actually making the product deployable. It took us like a week to get it started and rolling with clients, and that worked great. It was super painless to get started. And then as we made our way through the POC, obviously we're starting to see things that we hadn't seen before. We actually had some, activity on our network that we knew about, that we were struggling to contain, that the POC helped us get our arms around. So I would say, within a month of that experience, we started to sort of see some of the positive benefits, and then started to set up okay, well, where else could we do this? Other observations, we were able to put the agents, feature agnostic across different endpoints, so Mac, Linux, Windows, in a sense different agent but the same features across the three, which is sort of noteworthy. You usually tend to have to give up something to go to Mac or go to Linux. I think we were in the 5,000 to 6,000 range at the end of the POC, yeah. The prevention-based element sort of manifests in a day-to-day basis where we're not chasing AV alerts, we're not necessarily trying to figure out what version of the DAT file or whatever file it is, depending on the AV vendor we're on, trying to figure out and address those issues. So we're saving a lot of time not having to do that. It's really more around, or at least getting it going has been focused on making sure we have good coverage of the product. One must familiarize themselves with these technologies to truly understand them conceptually or fundamentally. And I think once you get there, it's, especially depending on the use case, endpoint protection being one, you understand why it makes sense to take that approach, right? The variation of the devices you'd have to protect is huge. The amount of variables you'd have to take into consideration, the dependencies that software has on other software, make it a good use case for AI, because, or at least machine learning, because it sort of supports and can help defend conclusions reached on what to do or not to do in those particular cases. Being able to be prevention-based allows not only us to be comfortable to a certain degree that we're doing the right things at the endpoint from an traditional AV perspective, but the amount of time we get back to our team to do other value-added activities is significant. They can, implement other protection strategies that they were unable to get to because of some of the chasing that we were doing, trying to make the other products work. That's been something we've noticed that's material in nature. So the Threat Zero team ran our implementation, which went well, or it's still ongoing. We are getting into the EDR side of things, so we'll be beginning to deploy optics to a few interesting use cases that we'd like to see how it performs. But as we go forward, we expect to consume more of those services, depending on if they solve our business problem or not. I don't think people really always connect the two, right? It's, if I'm doing less over here, it means I can be doing more over here, and I think that's been, especially if you have parity with respect to the protection before and after, that's a huge win. You have more time to focus on, like I said, other things that create value, things that'll make you more efficient, things that'll just make other protection strategies more effective, because you're not necessarily worried about making the thing that is the most ubiquitous piece of software in the network. I mean, how many other things can you say you've got one piece of software installed everywhere and it just works, right? Part of my job is to make sure that our senior management team is aware of the threats and aware of how we're addressing them. And I'd say in this specific regard, we spent a lot of time talking about ransomware and the impact that that's having. It's front page news, and hospitals seem to be targeted quite a bit. While I don't think we have the perfect answer, and we're always going to be working on this, and Cylance is a part of our solution, but not our entire. I think in general, they feel comfortable that we're doing the right things. And again, I think they understand that it's a process, and that I think everyone should sort of think about it this way. There's no perfect answer, and there's no one solution, but when you can put things together that have not only the protective value that you want, but they make sense because they make you more efficient and they make you faster and stronger in the sense, they seem to understand the benefit of that and want to go in those directions in most cases when it comes to protecting their assets. It's a great, approach to addressing the problem that we have around protecting and securing devices. It's different in a positive way, but I think the other benefits that we get from it aren't so obvious, and it would be interesting if we really sat down and studied and measured it, because I guarantee you it would be measurable improvement in areas you would not expect to get by implementing a new antivirus product. There's probably a couple of right answers to this. So I would say one, the investment organizations have made already in some of these endpoint tools to roll them out and configure them and test them and have them work with all their existing equipment and apps is not insignificant. And I don't think that, at least my experience has been trying to explain how that's different, and sort of when you're not signature based and what that looks like is hard to really do until you actually get it up and running and convince people. So you have to see it actually do that. And so I know my own experiences trying to take a shop that might be big red or big yellow, whatever, and move them to a point where like you don't need all those components. You don't need to, there's no such thing as necessarily having such a humongous whitelist of apps or things you can't scan. There's no need to run daily scans or weekly scans, right? Those concepts you can get away from because that's not how this stuff works, but really proving that that actually is the case when you put something down really can only be done when you see it, you know, and when you think about it. So there's a little bit of learning up front that people need to do, but once you're over that, it's really showing it. And I think some organizations may not be ready and want to take that leap. Another one that is definitely front of mind for me is, you know, traditional AV vendors or people who do endpoint protection package all their stuff into one big bundle of stuff, right? So you've got all these layered security products, a firewall, and encryption's a big one. Encryption's like the cornerstone. I don't know if you've ever tried to change encryption vendors, but like that is the one project no IT professional ever wants to touch. But all the dependent software packages that apparently provide a greater level of security you'd otherwise get if you went best of breed on each, those are really hard to get rid of in case you wanted to. Trying to take out a product that has all these features and lay a new one down. I mean, in some cases, without trying, it's enough for somebody to say, no, we're just gonna, you know, plug our ears and cover our eyes and stick with what we got, because the thought of even trying to change is too hard. And addressing it through like a technology refresh, so like as we issue new devices, that's an approach to getting around that that I'm not sure is taken as often as it should. I think the interesting thing in support of that second comment is, you know, we're leveraging Cylance on top of existing AV, so we're running it side by side, day to day, and we're catching stuff that the stuff we have isn't, which is sort of proof point one, and it's a fact, like it's happening. But you know, proof point two, it's like we're also looking at saying how do we get some of the things we need to have that these endpoint protection products have, but and do it in a different way. I think if you trace it back and think about it, like each of those layers was added at a certain time due to a certain type of attack that was occurring, right? So like at one point firewalls were needed because of network intrusion. So then we checked the box on that, and then then it became really interesting malware. And so now we have a malware solution. And then so it's always been in reaction to some event where no one's ever said like, well, why don't we just try to be something that can detect undetectable or unpredictable things, right? Which is a totally different way of looking at the issue as opposed to trying to apply layers. It's just like, yeah, we're gonna expect to not understand what is happening, but we know what is good and we know what is bad, and we're gonna do good things and not bad things, like thinking about it that way. And I think that's the difference in approach. I think eventually, yeah, you're gonna start to see people sort of scaling that stuff back a little bit, but I mean, I think you sort of have to address all the ingress points, I guess is probably the best way. So like people are one, networks are others, you know, but if so long as you have a coherent way of saying, well, here's how all these existing threats that used to necessitate a firewall are being addressed in this new way, yeah, I mean, you'll get there. I think it's eventually a matter of time.